الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وحبيب رب العالمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. We ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to grant us the sincere intentions عن أبي موسى عبد الله بن قيس الأشعري رضي الله عنه أنه قال: سئل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الرجل يقاتل شجاعة ويقاتل حمية ويقاتل رياء، أي ذلك في سبيل الله؟ فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: من قاتل لتكون كلمة الله هي العليا فهو في سبيل الله. This hadith was narrated by both Al-Bukhari and Muslim. This hadith was narrated by a companion by the name of Abdullah ibn Qais ibn Sulaym ibn Haddar ibn Harb. He's better known as Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu, a mujtahid from the mujtahids of the companions. Among the companions whose number was close to 114,000, approximately 200, only 200, were mujtahid scholars. Like today we know Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Ahmed and others. Like this, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu was a mujtahid among the companions. His mother was Dhabbiyah bint Wahb, and his mother embraced al-Islam and passed away in al-Madinah. He is known as Abu Musa al-Ash'ari because he is affiliated to Al-Ash'ar, and Al-Ash'ar was one of the sons of a famous city. He was from a famous city known as Saba in the Yemen. Saba, if it's put into English, did you know what it is, Saba? Bilqis was from there. She was the queen of Saba, but you never heard of the Queen of Sheba? So you have heard of the Queen of Sheba. Yes. Bilqis? Yes. She was the Queen of Sheba, As-Saba. You've read Surah As-Saba maybe in the Quran. Saba. So his family originally were from the Yemen. Al-Yemen. From the lineage of Al-Ash'ar, who lived in Saba. And Al-Ash'ar, who lived many thousands of years ago, was known as Al-Ash'ar. The Sheen, the Ain and the Ra, it refers to hair. So when he was born, he had a lot of hair. So they decided to give him a title, Al-Ash'ar. Abu Musa, what was the name of Abu Musa? Subhanallah al-Azim. Allahu Akbar. Let's renew our intentions again for the sake of Allah, speaking about the pious people. Abu Musa, did I mention his name yet? Because it might be one of those trick questions. I did. Abdullah, okay? Abu Musa was born in the Yemen. Abu Musa embraced al-Islam in Mecca and migrated to Al-Habasha. Remember, before the migration to Al-Madinah, many of the companions, a good number of them, traveled to Al-Habasha, where Al-Najashi was. Among them was Uthman radiyallahu anhu, and his wife, at the time the daughter of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, and Salama, Hind radiyallahu anha, who later became one of Ummahatil Mu'mineen, one of the wives of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, whose name is Abdullah. He also traveled to Al-Habasha. This was around when the Prophet was sallallahu alayhi wasallam 45 years of age. So how many years after revelation came to him? 5. When he was approximately 40, al-Wahi came to him alayhi salatu wassalam. The first battle that he fought alongside the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was Khaybar. Khaybar, which is to the north of Al-Madinah. The Jews who ran from Al-Madinah because they betrayed the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, gathered and mustered up an army in Khaybar, and the Prophet surprised them alayhi salatu wasalam. He went from war to war, and he besieged their houses, their fortresses. This was the first battle that Abu Musa took part in. Now, the battles, if you want to understand really well the life of the Prophet ﷺ and how it was documented, the scholars, they would build the companions' lives around the wars. So they would say, Shahid al-Mashahida kullaha, that this particular companion, for example, took part in all of the battles. Or such and such companion took part in 4 battles, or 5 battles, or 6 battles. So Abu Musa, the first ever battle he took part in was Khaybar. And he was considered to be one of those that recited Quran to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he accompanied him sallallahu alaihi wasallam and learned a lot from him. Later on, in the time of Umar radiyallahu anhu, he was given authority over Al-Kufa. Al-Kufa, which is in which country? Al-Iraq. And then after that, he was given authority over Al-Basra, which is in Al-Iraq. What do they refer to it as in English? You would have heard it. Sorry? Basra. Remember maybe 20 years ago when they went in, we heard a lot about Basra. Al-Basra. And the people of Al-Basra, they learned a lot from him. I mean, he was a mujtahid. La ilaha illallah. And he is the one, he took part in a war in Iran. And he conquered with the Muslims there the city of Tustar, or Tustur you could say. And there is a famous wali, or a lot of pious people that came from this town, like Sahal ibn Abdullah Tusturi, or Tustari. And he was known to have a beautiful voice. Now, the people of Yemen, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned them, and that they, in his time, they were of good standing. they had a good status. The hadith, كَانَ اللَّهُ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْءٌ غَيْرُهُ, Allah existed and nothing other than Allah existed, and the arsh of Allah then was on water. This was an answer to a question posed by 3 people from Al-Yemen. The Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Ahl al-Yaman, O people of Al-Yaman, iqbalul bushra, accept the glad tidings. Iqbalul bushra, accept al-qabul, accept the bushra that has come to you, that Allah eternally willed that Al-Yaman, it would prosper religiously at a particular time. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Imanu Yamanin. What did he say? Al-Imanu Yamanin, literally meaning Al-Iman, faith, is Yemenis. Wal-Fiqhu Yamanin. What did he say? And from the beginning, 3, 2, 1. Al-Imanu Yamanin, literally meaning faith, is Yemenis. Wal-Fiqhu Yamanin, and understanding of the religious knowledge, it is Yemenis. Wal-Hikmatu Yamaniyah, and wisdom, and this includes knowledge about the attributes of Allah and so on, is Yemenis. Narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. And like this, the Prophet ﷺ praised many a people. Like he said ﷺ about Ash-Sham. He said, Tuba lish-Sham, glad tidings be to Ash-Sham. فَإِنَّ لِلشَّامِ مَلَائِكَةً بَاسِطَةً أَجْنِحَتَهَا عَلَيْهِ. Because Ash-Sham has angels that have their wings outspread over it. This is also a Sahih hadith. But it is important to understand that this was referring to a particular point in time. Because remember, the Prophet also said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, إِذَا فَسَدَ أَهْلُ الشَّامِ, if there is fasad, corruption, when there is rather fasad and corruption in the lands of Ash-Sham, فَلَا خَيْرَ فِيكُمْ, then the blessings that exist in the rest of the world, all the world, including Ash-Sham, they will be lessened. So this tells us that when the Prophet ﷺ mentioned Ash-Sham and mentioned the Yemen, that it was at a specific time, meaning that al-imanu yamanin wal-hikmatu yamaniyah wal-fiqhu yamanin, this does not apply to the Yemen of today. Because all of the countries change. Look at Mecca and Al-Madinah. Who is considered the religious authority in Mecca and Al-Madinah nowadays? You know. Who is it that leads the prayers? Who is it that patrols outside the grave of the Prophet ﷺ? Who is it that does all of this? We know that these are people who are either Wahhabiyah or they have been influenced by the Wahhabiyah, taught by the Wahhabiyah. So places change. So it's not okay for a person to say nowadays, well, the Prophet ﷺ said, Yemen is blessed. And Yemen has a high status. And al-imanu yamanin, that even on the dates they write it now, al-imanu yamanin. So as to try to prove or substantiate their stance that whatever comes out of Yemen, or if people are dressed like Muslims and they speak like the Muslims and they say we are Ahlus Sunnah and they say that we are Sufiya and they say, for example, just an example, that we are Shafi'is, then because they're from the Yemen, they must be right because the Prophet said so, alayhi salatu wassalam. But this is not the case. This is not the case. Al-Hafiz al-Nawawi, he explained this hadith, and you'll realize why I'm talking about this. Al-Hafiz al-Nawawi said that this hadith about the Yemen, it was specific to the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to those people that were there. Likewise in Fathul Bari, Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar, he said, Al-Muradu bidhalik al-mawjudi minhum hina idhin. When the Prophet said alayhi salatu wasalam that literally what means faith is Yemenis, people who have strong faith there and they follow the religion there and they will have scholars and knowledge and so on, he said the people that were intended by the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam were those that existed at that time. لا كل أهل اليمن في كل زمان. Not every single person in the Yemen at every single time. And Al-Hafiz al-Nawawi said something similar, if not even more explicit. Nowadays, in Damascus, don't we know that Damascus is a place out of which the Sufyani will come? The Sufyani, a man, an evil man, a wicked man, he will appear and he will intend to attack Al-Mahdi with an army. He's coming out of Damascus, which is in Ash-Sham, which is sometimes referred to itself as Ash-Sham. But didn't the Prophet say, alayhi salatu wasalam, the angels have their wings over Ash-Sham and so on? Well, that was at a specific time. The merits of Ash-Sham, they were specific to a specific time. It doesn't mean now that everybody that comes out of or learns in Ash-Sham, they have to be knowledgeable. Among the most people, among the people who introduced swearing at Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, this started or was prevalent in Damascus, in Ash-Sham. As for the Yemen, if we were to say hypothetically that today there were people in Yemen who have thousands of followers around the world or millions of followers around the world. Just having followers does not make a person 100% correct or on the truth. For look at some of these singers and some of these actors. They have a much larger following than many of these people. So, what have we seen from the Yemen in the past 100 years or more, up to nowadays? We see people going against the belief of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and that which he taught. That he taught that water is the first of creation, and this is correct and this is true. But then you have some people from the Yemen who say no, there was something known as the Nur of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and that this was the first of creation. Or even if they don't go into detail about it, they sing mada'ih nasheeds, where this is mentioned without clarifying it, the judgment is, at the very least, if a person mentions this issue and they were ignorant about it, then they would fall into a major sin. What is that major sin? It is for giving a religious judgment without knowledge. And this is considered a bid'ah in belief. It's considered what the scholars refer to as an innovation in belief. Meaning this person would be considered a Muslim, but they would be considered to be someone who the scholars termed as a major sinner in belief. And he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, أَبَى اللَّهُ أَن يَقْبَلَ عَمَلَ ذِي بِدْعَةٍ حَتَّى يَدَعَ بِدْعَتَهُ. Allah Ta'ala does not accept the deeds, meaning Allah doesn't reward, does not accept the deeds of a person who has an innovation in their creed. Now, because of certain details, they might not be judged as non-Muslims because they don't know that they're actively belying the Prophet. But in their prayers, in their fasting, in their day-to-day deeds that they do, the Prophet said they don't get any reward. Praying behind a person who is a fasiq, it doesn't yield a person any reward. Praying behind a fasiq, it doesn't yield a person any reward. So this issue is one that one needs to be aware of. One needs to take care of their own prayers. Imagine a person praying behind someone who has this incorrect belief. They might not be judged as a kafir. I mean, if they knew that the first of creation is water and still went against it, they'd be belying their religion. This would be kufr, this is obvious. But if they're adamant upon saying that the Prophet's nur is the first of creation, then they would be majorly sinful. And they would be a major sinner. So praying behind such a person would not be rewardable. Anyway, so there are many things that have come out of Al-Yemen and still exist today and come out of Al-Yemen. Like, for example, there are some people in Al-Yemen that teach that the kafir, Abu Lahab, he is relieved every Monday of torture because he was pleased at the birth of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. This is false. This is against the Quran. لا يخفف عنهم من عذابها. Allah revealed that the torture of the kafir will not be lessened. Especially Abu Lahab, about whom Allah revealed in the Quran that he will be in hell, and his wife also. So this is a matter that belies the Quran. And like this, there are matters that we need to be very, very aware of. So just because a person claims to be amongst the Sufis, just because a person has many followers, or because they say, or because they do a lot of dhikr, and they recite poetry, and they sing, and a person likes to be with them because they get this false sense of spiritualism. They feel like these people are really ruhaniya. They have this ruhaniya. They have this spiritual vibe about them. That is not the criterion. That is not the criterion. Some people in the past used to think that they have this spiritual vibe. And in actual fact, the devils would come to play with them. The devils would harm them. Some people used to think that they could fly in the past. And it would be the shayateen that carried them. They carried them once, they carried them twice, they carried them 3 times. Then perhaps this person thought he could fly. This person jumped off a mountain. You know where he went? Down. And he died. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So, the people of Al-Yemen, they saw in the past, they saw prophets. The people of Yemen, they saw many blessings. But that was in the past. They saw many scholars. Yes, that was in the past. Perhaps there are scholars today in Yemen. But it is unfortunate that nowadays people are fooled and people are enticed by what looks good to them, because they don't judge based on religious knowledge. They judge based upon their emotion. I've heard some people using this, saying, well, Shaykh Abdullah, originally his book Al-Mukhtasar, it was a summary of a book written by a scholar from the Yemen. Okay, and that's fine. Look at Al-Andalus. I'll tell you about Al-Andalus. Do you know how many scholars there were in Muslim Spain? Hundreds. Hundreds and hundreds of scholars. Huffaz of Hadith were born in Spain and lived in Spain. Perhaps some of them even died in Spain. But that does not mean today we can say, well, I was born in Spain, so I must... Nah. And like this, the scholar said, Al-ardu la tuqaddisu ahlaha. The land doesn't sanctify its people. If a land has been mentioned to be blessed, then that doesn't mean that automatically those that live upon it, they have a high status. Who controls Palestine? Who controls Al-Aqsa? Who controls where Ibrahim alayhi salam is buried? Who controls those areas? They are blessed areas. Allah revealed, الَّذِي بَارَكْنَا حَوْلَهُ. Do Muslims control those areas? No. Al-Yahud. Are the Yahud blessed? La. So one should not be fooled. One should not be fooled, and one should stick to the rules of the religion. So, al-imanu yamanin, wal-fiqhu yamanin, wal-hikmatu yamaniyah. This refers to a particular time in the past. And now these things have changed. Even in Mecca and Medina, things have changed. So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu, he was from the Yemen originally. He said, I exited the Yemen with about 50 people. And us three brothers were together. He said, myself, wa Abu Ruhum was his brother, wa Abu Amir. And we got to An-Najashi. We went across, we went to the west from Yemen, and we got to Ethiopia, to Abyssinia. And there we found Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the brother of Ali radiyallahu anhu, and his companions. And we stayed there until Khaybar. We joined the Muslims and we went to Khaybar and took part in Khaybar. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said to us, "Lakumul hijratu marratayn." You migrated twice. Hajartum ila Najashi. You went to An-Najashi, the king of Abyssinia. Wa hajartum ilayya. And you migrated to me. Likewise, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam made dua for Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. He said, Allahumma ghfir li Abdillah ibn Qais. Allahumma ghfir li Abdillah ibn Qais dhanbah. Oh Allah, forgive the sins of Abdullah ibn Qais, Abu Musa. وَأَدْخِلْهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ مُدْخَلًا كَرِيمًا. And Ya Allah, grant him status and honor on the day of judgment. The Prophet ﷺ once said to his companions, يَقْدُمُ عَلَيْكُمْ غَدًا قَوْمٌ هُمْ أَرَقُّ قُلُوبًا لِلْإِسْلَامِ مِنْكُمْ. Tomorrow, a people will arrive And he meant literally tomorrow or soon. A people will arrive, a nation will arrive, and their hearts are soft. Their hearts and their dealings are soft, softer than yours, he said to his companions. Then, who arrived from the Yemen? The Ash'aris, this tribe of the Ash'aris. They came. And as they were coming, subhanallah, you imagine this, when you read about it, you can't help but imagine it. The different tribes came to Al-Madinah, to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And each one of them would have a chant. They'd be chanting something, marching, until they get to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. These particular people, this tribe, the people of the Ash'aris, Al-Ash'ariyun, they were chanting in one voice. Imagine 50 of them or more. غَدًا نَلْقَى الْأَحِبَّةِ مُحَمَّدًا وَحِزْبَهِ. They were chanting as they were coming, and they're going to meet the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. They were chanting, tomorrow we will meet our beloveds. We will meet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and his group, and the group of Muslims that are with him. And when they came, the Ash'ariyun, when they came, the companions said, they started to shake our hands. And it's mentioned that the Yemenis people, the Ash'ariyun, the Ash'aris, they were the first to shake hands in this way. They introduced shaking hands to the people originally. You look at the Ash'aris and those from whom Abu Musa comes. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala revealed in the Quran, فَسَوْفَ يَأْتِ اللَّهُ بِقَوْمٍ يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَهُ. Soon Allah will bring about a people. The Prophet mentioned this. It was revealed in the Quran. So the Prophet told the companions, soon Allah will bring about a people that love Allah. They love Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And Allah Ta'ala accepts them. They have attained the acceptance of Allah. Allah has eternally willed that they will attain the acceptance of Allah. They are soft with the Muslims. They are polite in their dealings. They are wise, but they are strong against al-kuffar. لا يخافون في الله لومة لائم. They do not fear anyone when it comes to standing up for the truth. When it comes for al-haq, when it comes to bidding the lawful, bidding the obligatory rather, and stamping out the haram, لا يخافون. There's no khawf. لا يخافون لومة لائم. They do not fear anybody at all. So then, when this ayah was revealed, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam turned to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari and he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, hum qawmuka ya Aba Musa. These are your people, ya Aba Musa. These will be your people that come in the future. Once the Prophet ﷺ was walking with Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. And the Prophet ﷺ does not speak unless there is wisdom in it, of course. So he once said to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Ya Aba Musa, قل لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Say, Aba Musa, say لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. So he said it. He said, لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. So the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام said, لقد أوتيت كنزا من كنوز الجنة. Ya Aba Musa, you have been given a treasure from among the treasures of paradise. So there and then, it wasn't like a treasure appeared in front of him. But the Prophet's sayings are true. He said, لَقَدْ أُوتِيتَ كَنْزًا مِّن كُنُوزِ الْجَنَّةِ. When a pious person says something to you sometimes, from what they're inspired to say, it just comes out sometimes. I'm not talking about the Prophet here, but a pious person, sometimes something rolls on their tongue. Then you might see the effect of that 20 years later, or 30 years later. As for the Prophet ﷺ, it was revealed to him to say to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari that you have been granted a treasure among the treasures of paradise. The scholars said, they talked at length about this hadith. They said, well, what does that mean? What was his treasure? They said that it is the case that treasure remains after its owner passes away. And then that treasure is inherited. They said Abu Musa passed away and he did not see this treasure in his life. Likewise, his son passed away and he did not see. Like this, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, his 8th grandson was a direct chain like this. His great grandson was Ali ibn Ismail, who we all know as Al-Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. They said this was the treasure that the Prophet ﷺ foretold, informed Abu Musa al-Ash'ari about. Because Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari became known as, and is known as today also, it's been over 1,000 years, he is known as Imam Ahli Sunnati wal Jama'ah. All of the scholars, most of the scholars that you can name, they follow al-Ash'ari. An-Nawawi was an Ash'ari. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani was an Ash'ari. You have As-Suyuti, Jalaluddin As-Suyuti, he was an Ash'ari. Al-Qushayri was an Ash'ari. Izzuddin ibn Abd salam, huge scholars that you hear about. They were Ash'ari scholars. Now what does it mean to be an Ash'ari? The Prophet ﷺ, in his time, the Muslims were known as Al-Muslimun. And they were known as Al-Mu'minun, as the Quran described them. Al-Muslimun, Al-Mu'minun, the believers, the Muslims. Also, they referred to themselves as As-Sawadul A'zam, the greater majority. The greater majority, imagine the Muslims on the earth, there are this many people. As-Sawadul A'zam is the greater majority of these Muslims, they're all Muslims, who follow the Prophet ﷺ in everything, even in the creed. Who is that minority that are still Muslims but don't follow the Prophet in everything? Like the people that have an innovation in their creed. Like the people that have an innovation in their creed. Like the people that we mentioned in the beginning. So the majority are upon the beliefs of the Prophet ﷺ. So they used to call themselves the majority. We are the majority. We are As-Sawadul A'zam. They used to also call themselves Al-Firqatun Najiyah, which means the saved group. Because the Prophet mentioned, alayhi salatu wassalam, Ahlul Sunnah would split, or Ahlul Sunnah, the Muslims in his nation would split into 73 groups. Kulluhum fin nar, all of them will be in hell. Illa wahida, except one. He said, what is that one, O Messenger of Allah? He said, Al-Firqatun Najiyah, the saved group. So they used to call themselves Al-Firqatun Najiyah. They used to call themselves the people of the Sunnah, because the Prophet continually mentioned, he who is upon my Sunnah, he who is upon my Sunnah, my way, my creed and beliefs and practices. So they started to call themselves, we are people of the Sunnah, so we are Ahlul Sunnah. And the Prophet ﷺ used to mention readily al-jama'ah, be with al-jama'ah, stay with al-jama'ah, do not disperse, do not separate, be with al-jama'ah, the group, the congregation. So they said, well, we are of these people, we are Muslims, so we are Ahlul Jama'ah. So some people shortened it and said, well, Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, that's us. We are al-Muslimun, we are al-Mu'minun, we are al-Sawad al-A'zam, we are al-Firqatul Najiyah, and we are Ahlul Sunnah and Ahlul Jama'ah, i.e. Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Then in the 4th century, when a lot of imposters and charlatans appeared and started to say things left and right, trying to misguide people, Al-Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, the 8th grandson of the companion Abu Musa, he rose up after having actually been with the Mu'tazila, or associated with a misguided faction. But Allah guides whom He wills. Look at the companions. A lot of the companions, they had worshipped idols before the Prophet came, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Sayyiduna Umar radiyallahu anhu, and other companions. But now, what do we say? We say Sayyiduna Umar, our master Umar. Ya salam. People change them, right? Yes, they change. So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, or rather Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu, he debated many people until he got to a point where it was in Ramadan, coincidentally, in the first 10 days of Ramadan. And he had locked himself away in his house because he was confused. Because he saw what the Mu'tazila was saying, but it didn't make sense to his mind. It didn't make sense according to the Quran and his mind. It didn't make sense how they could say those things, and how easily he would refute some of those people who he himself was attributed to. So he locked himself away in his house in Ramadan. In the first 10 days, he saw the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam, and he said to him sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Ya Ali, because his name was Ali, Ali the son of Ismail. His title was Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said to him, Ya Ali, unsur al-madhahib al-marwiyata anni. Support that which was revealed, that which was conveyed from me, meaning in the Quran and the Hadiths. And what makes sense in terms of the Quran and the Hadith, go with that. So he saw the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and then he exerted himself. He looked at the proofs in the different cases. I won't mention what they are right now. But in the different issues, he exerted himself, and he looked and he looked and he looked, and he didn't really come to anything. Then in the second third of Ramadan, he saw the Prophet again alayhi salatu wasalam. Again, the Prophet said to him sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Ya Ali, unsur al-madhahib al-marwiyata anni. Support that which was revealed to me. And again, he exerted himself, but then in the last third, he saw the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And again he said to him, Ya Ali, unsur al-madhahib al-marwiyata anni. So he said, Ya Rasulullah, I've searched and I've tried and I've looked. And then when he woke up, he exerted himself again until he understood the proofs. Then he was in Iraq. He went to one of the masjids. It is taught Yawm al-Jumu'ah, when in the Muslim countries the masjid will be full of thousands of people. He rose up to the mimbar and he said, "O people, I used to say," and he mentioned some of these things that he used to say, as the Mu'tazila say. And then he said, now, this is narrated, Now I separate myself from these beliefs just as I separate myself from this garment of mine. And he was wearing something on the upper part of his body. And he took it off and he flung it down off the minbar, showing the people that he is no longer with the Mu'tazila. Then Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala blessed him with barakah in his time, barakah in his tongue, barakah in the way that he displayed the proofs, such that the people started to notice. And the scholars of that time also, that couldn't articulate the way Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari could, they were not able at that time to go to the Quran and extract from the Quran different proofs that people before were not in need of, because there was no enemy at the door. Now there was an enemy at the door. So Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari extracted the proofs using the intellect also, using the Quran firstly and using the intellect, and he started to refute people left, right and center. And then when the Sunni Muslims, al-Firqatul Najiyah, al-Sawad al-A'zam, Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, when they saw Abu Hassan, he is supporting Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah in a strong way, they teamed up with him. They grouped with him. They started to say, we are with al-Ash'ari. You're either with us or you're with them. You're either with Ahlul Sunnah, you're either with the Muslims, today who are known as the Ash'aris. This is another name you can add on. You're either with the Ash'aris or you're with them. And the same as this, in Uzbekistan, Al-Imam Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Maturidi, known as Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, he did the exact same thing. Surprisingly, these two were contemporaries, Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, but they never met. They did almost the exact same thing, refuting the people of misguidance by looking at the Quran and using the intellect and extracting new proofs that were there, but they hadn't been extracted before. They were in the Quran, but they hadn't been looked at in that way before. And so people in those areas, they started to say, we are Maturidiyya. Who is our teacher? Who is our shaykh? Whose beliefs do our beliefs agree with? Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. So in the 4th century, Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, it acquired a new name, 2 new names, as well as Ahlul Sunnah, Ahlul Jama'ah, Al-Muslimun, Al-Mu'minun, Al-Sawad al-A'zam, Al-Firqatul Najiyah. They attained a new name known as Al-Asha'ira, the Ash'aris, and Al-Maturidiyah, the Maturidis. And like that, all the scholars, all the Sunni scholars that came after them, whether they were from Morocco or Central Africa, or they were from Indonesia, or they came from India, or they came even from Europe, places like Turkey and places like Greece and Armenia, and all of them, when they wanted to identify themselves against the kuffar that worship things that they say, that worship what they believe is in the sky, against the anthropomorphists, they would say, we are Ash'aris, or we are Maturidis, or even better, as our Shaykh said, we are Ash'aris and we are Maturidis. If we follow Al-Ash'ari in most things as we do, then we love the Maturidis. And if someone was to be a Maturidi, then they would love the Ash'aris. They have slight differences in some things in belief, slight differences. As for saying Allah is not like the creation, yeah, they agree on that, of course they do. As for saying the attributes of Allah do not change, they agree on that, of course. And like this, the impeccability of the prophets and so on, there are things in there that they agree upon. There are a very small amount of matters that they do not agree upon. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, the Wahhabiyya, they try to take from his status. They say, Salahuddin, because they know he was an Ash'ari. And he was a core Ash'ari. They say, Salahuddin, he was more of a fighter. He was just like a warrior. You know, he's just like, he's the leader of an army. He didn't really know much about creed. No, he did know about creed. Of course he did. He used to have people, you think about the number of masajid at the time of Al-Fajr that came under his rulership, if you will, his control. There were about 4,000 mosques or more in Egypt and in all these areas that he had control over. He used to have them reciting Aqidat ibn Asakir, in which it says Allah doesn't have a beginning or an end. Allah, you don't say before or after about Allah. You don't say above or below about Allah. Allah cannot be imagined in the mind. Allah is unimaginable. He used to have this playing from, not playing, but people, they would be shouting it from the minarets before Al-Fajr. So if we had been alive at that time, one of us takes our sons, for example, to the masjid, what do they hear every morning? Allah is without a place. Allah is unimaginable. Allah cannot be imagined in the mind. Allah is not like the creation. So you're telling Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, who instructed this to happen, he didn't know about these things? Ridiculous. So they try to take from his status. They say, he was just a warrior, but he was an Ash'ari. Of course he was. He memorized a book called At-Tanbih, a book that we hope, inshallah, we can memorize one day, but that's being humble. But realistically, I don't think any of us are ever going to memorize At-Tanbih. It's huge. It's huge, this book. He learned it with a teacher and he memorized it. That's saying something. In the past, they used to measure a person's knowledge upon the scale of how much he's memorized. Meaning, it's a prerequisite that he's taken it with a teacher. It's obvious. So they used to measure it by the scale of how much this person has memorized. And then you have Muhammad al-Fatih, who was a Maturidi, who conquered Constantinople. In which year? 14. That's right, 14. Sorry? 53. He conquered. He was a Maturidi. His mashayikh were Maturidiyah. His shaykh, he was the one that found the grave of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, because he saw a nur coming down from the sky, hitting a particular area, and they found it to be the grave of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. So they were Maturidis. What do they say, the Wahhabiyah? They call the Ottoman Caliphate, which lasted a good 700 years, they call it the occupation, the illegal occupation of the Holy Lands, meaning Mecca and Medina. As though the Ottomans were kuffar. Well, they believe them to be kuffar. They call them grave worshippers. They say that these people, they were occupying illegally Mecca and Al-Medina. So they hate the Ash'aris. They hate the Maturidis. Who is the Ummah other than the Ash'aris and the Maturidis? Sometimes the Muslims, the scholars, even in our times, our teachers, they say to them, to the Wahhabiyya, mention one chain of narration that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ that doesn't contain an Ash'ari. They're all Ash'aris. Because if they consider the Ash'aris as kuffar, which they do, and the Maturidis as kuffar, which they do, then according to them, they're not reliable for narration. So according to them, the religion would be lost. How would it work? So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari was this companion that narrated this hadith that I haven't yet explained. But he was the great-great-grandfather of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu, who is known as Imam Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Him, along with Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, we say about them, Imama. So the two Imams. Imama Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. In creed. As for the four Imams, so that we're not confused, the four Imams, Shafi'i, Malik, Abu Hanifa, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal, radiyallahu anhum, we follow them in terms of the religious acts, but they also have sayings in creed. But they came before al-Ash'ari, and they came before Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. Al-Maturidi was a Hanafi. Al-Ash'ari, both the Shafi'is and the Malikis like to claim him. Allah knows best what he was. So we are among the Ash'aris. We are also considered among the Maturidis. And the Wahhabiyya, it has been the so-called Salafiyya, it has been their attempt to try to ostracize each of these groups and to say to them, well, the Ash'aris disagree with the Maturidis, so the Ash'aris are separate and the Maturidis are separate, and they're both kuffar. This is ultimately what they're trying to do. And unfortunately, many people have not heard about the Ash'aris in the wider public. They have not heard about it. So it's important that these lessons be given. It's important that this information be spread. It's important that the prophetic guidance, like when he mentioned La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, and that he's been given a treasure from among the treasures of paradise, and like pointing when the ayah was revealed to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, these things, they weren't mentioned without a benefit. They're mentioned with a benefit. So it's important to recognize ourselves and who we follow. Yes, we are Muslims. But because there are so many people that call themselves Muslims, we have to identify what is the belief system that we follow. We are Ash'aris and we are Maturidis. We are Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Otherwise, the Qadiani, the Mirzai, they say we are Muslims too. Then we'd say, no, you are kuffar. Okay, it's very, very important that we identify like this, because the Prophet ﷺ said, Unasun min jildatina, people who speak like us, people who look like us, يتكلمون بألسنتنا, they speak like us, تعرف منهم وتنكر. You would see them doing things that you think, yeah, that's good. But then you see them doing and saying things that are bad. They mix things, right? دعاة على أبواب جهنم, they call people to hellfire. And whoever obeys them, whoever likes to blur the lines and says, oh, I'm just saying I'm a Muslim, this person will get confused. Of course they will. They blur the lines for others and they blur the lines for themselves, and they think that they're doing the admirable and honorable thing by saying, I'm not going into a sect or a faction, I'm just a Muslim. Subhanallah, this person needs education. Let's stop here today, inshaAllah. Let's recite Al-Fatiha and send the reward of that to the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, as we usually do. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. Before we finish, it is noteworthy to mention that people nowadays who are against the Ash'aris, openly, if you've heard, are people like Yasir al-Qadi, are people like Muhammad Hijab, are people like this, a lot of people that you know or may hear of on social media. They're against the Ash'aris. They, even though they differ among themselves, they follow the so-called Salafi movement in one way or another. Some of them are at war with each other, but they have the same principles, which is to liken Allah to the creation. So one needs to be aware of these things, so that they don't end up 10 years later finding out that their son or their daughter has gone down the wrong path. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِلَى مَتَى تَرِعُونَ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الْفَاجِرِ, until when will you neglect mentioning the people of misguidance by name? He said, أُذْكُرُوهُمْ, mention them, the Prophet said, حَتَّى يَحْذَرَهُمُ النَّاسِ, so that people can be warned against them. Let's say La ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. La ilaha illallah, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Also, just before we finish, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said that whoever consumes every morning 7 ajwa dates, this person, he will be safe from being afflicted with magic. Now, yes, tahseen, sometimes, subhanallah, we say it, sometimes we don't say it, sometimes we forget. Okay? So, the AICP has, mashallah, how convenient, the AICP has ajwa dates that have actually come from Al-Madinah. You know, sometimes there are people that say that the dates have come from Al-Madinah, but we might say they've grown them in the back garden or something like that, right? These are actually, they've come through a trustworthy and reliable source from gardens, actual gardens in Al-Madinah, from the palm trees of Al-Madinah. So at the very least, you would have something from Al-Madinah, as well as on top of that, dates about which the Prophet spoke, about which he spoke, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. In England, what do we have? We have potatoes, don't we? We have no shortage of potatoes, mashallah. But we don't have much ajwa. At the very least, I'll tell you something. When I went to Al-Madinah, we got some ajwa dates. And even when I came back to England, you can ask my wife. Even when I came back to England, when I was eating the ajwa dates, I wouldn't throw the pips away. You know why? That was for effect. Huh? I wouldn't throw the pit of the day away. Why? Why, Brother Nasir? It's from Al-Madinah, Brother Nasir. The Prophet ﷺ said, Allahumma ja'al fil madinati ضعفي ما جعلت في مكة من البركة. Oh Allah, put in Al-Madinah, instill within Al-Madinah, the soil of Al-Madinah, the air of Al-Madinah, instill within it twice as much, double the blessings that you put in Mecca. La ilaha illallah. I used to carry these pits around with me in my pocket. They're from Al-Madinah, min Madinati Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now I've got a box in my hand. Did you give this to me? Okay. Now I have some. Okay. Let's say again, La ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. These are being sold, so please. It is, how many? 2 for? £10. 2 for £10. 2 of these for £10. Approximately 300 grams. Yeah, if I give you an approximation now, how many dates are in here? 30, 35. That was a good guess. 35-ish. 33, 35. MashaAllah. There they are. Okay, let's say La ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim.